Episode 1. The Perfect Son's Disappearance. My family always had a favorite, and it wasn't me. In our house, my older brother Julian was the golden child. He was charismatic, handsome, and according to my parents, capable of no wrong. I, on the other hand, was Elias, the quiet younger brother, the one who worked in the shadows, the one who was expected to look after himself. Growing up, the contrast between how we were treated was staggering. When Julian wanted to go to an expensive Ivy League university, my parents didn't hesitate. They didn't have the liquid cash, so they willingly took out a massive second mortgage on our family home to pay for his tuition, housing, and luxury lifestyle. When I graduated high school and asked for help with a community college degree, my father looked at me with cold indifference and said, "Elias, you're a smart boy. You can find a way to pay for it yourself. We've already sacrificed so much for this family." So I did. I worked 2 jobs, took out student loans, and spent my nights studying until my eyes bled. I never complained. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I became successful on my own, my parents would finally look at me with the same pride they'd had when they looked at Julian. But I was wrong. Favoritism isn't based on logic. It's an incurable blindness. 3 years ago, Julian decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He didn't want a regular job. He wanted to be a CEO. He came to my parents with a flashy, half-baked business proposal for a tech startup. Once again, without asking a single hard question, my parents emptied their retirement accounts and gave him $500,000, $500,000. With that money, Julian bought a luxury sports car, rented a high-end apartment in the city, and threw lavish parties, claiming it was for networking. My parents bragged about him to everyone in our hometown. They told the neighbors that Julian was going to be a millionaire before he turned 30. Meanwhile, I was driving a beat-up sedan with a broken heater, barely making rent. Then, the tragedy struck. It was a Tuesday evening when my mother called me, screaming and crying hysterically. My father had collapsed in the living room. He had suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke. I rushed to the hospital immediately. When I arrived, the doctors told us the grim reality. My father was in a coma hanging on by a thread. He needed an emergency, highly complex neurosurgery to remove a blood clot in his brain. Without it, he would die within 48 hours. The problem was, our insurance didn't cover this specific advanced procedure, and the hospital demanded a deposit of $200,000 up front to clear him for the operating room. My mother was completely paralyzed by fear, weeping in the hospital waiting room. I knew I didn't have that kind of money. My savings were barely $5,000, but I knew who had it: Julian. Julian had just received $500,000 from my parents a few months prior. I stepped out into the hospital hallway and called Julian. It rang for a long time before he finally answered. His voice sounded distant, annoyed. "Julian, thank God you picked up," I said, my voice trembling. "Dad is in the hospital. He had a massive stroke. He needs surgery right now or he won't make it. The hospital needs $200,000. Please, you need to wire the money immediately from the business funds." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Julian finally spoke, his voice wasn't filled with panic or sorrow. It was filled with a cold, calculated defensiveness. "Elias, you don't understand," Julian stammered, coughing, forcing a fake sob. "I can't. I don't have the money." "What do you mean you don't have the money?" I shouted, losing my temper. "Mom and Dad just gave you $500,000. The market crashed, Elias. The startup, it failed. The investors pulled out, and I'm nosediving into bankruptcy. I'm drowning in debt right now. I don't even have enough money to pay my rent next month. If I could see Dad, I would, but I am completely broke. I'm sorry." Before I could say another word, Julian hung up the phone. I tried calling him back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. 10 minutes later, I tried again. The call wouldn't even connect. He hadn't just hung up on me. He had blocked my number. He blocked his own mother's number too. Julian, the golden child, had completely vanished into thin air the moment his family needed him. I walked back into the waiting room and looked at my mother. When I told her that Julian said he was broke and couldn't help, she refused to believe it. "No, not my Julian," she wept. "He must be in trouble. Someone must have done something to him. He would never abandon us." Even in the face of death, her delusion protected him. But I didn't have time for delusions. My father was dying. I looked at the doctor, then I looked at my mother, and I made a choice. I signed a document putting myself personally liable for the medical debt. I sold my beat-up car that very night to a sketchy dealership for a fraction of its worth. I emptied my tiny savings. I called every friend, every distant relative, and took out emergency high-interest personal loans. I managed to scrape together enough for the initial hospital deposit to get my father into the operating room. The surgery was a partial success. My father survived, but he was severely weakened. He needed intensive, round-the-clock physical therapy and specialized medication to recover. For the next 6 months, my life became a living hell. I worked my regular corporate job from 9 to 5, drove an Uber from 6 p.m. to midnight, and then spent the rest of the night at the hospital or at my parents' house, lifting my father, cleaning him, and managing his medication. During those 6 grueling months, we heard absolutely nothing from Julian. His social media accounts were deleted, his apartment was vacated, and his phone remained disconnected. My mother spent every night crying, not just for my father's health, but wondering if her precious, perfect son was lying dead in a ditch somewhere. She completely ignored the fact that I was destroying my own health, working 20 hours a day to keep her and my father alive. To her, my sacrifices were just expected, but Julian's absence was a tragedy. By the 6th month, my father's condition finally stabilized. He was able to sit up in bed and speak a few words. The doctors said he could continue his recovery at home, but the financial toll on me was devastating. I was over $150,000 in debt. My credit score was ruined, and I was running on pure exhaustion. One Sunday afternoon, while my father was sleeping, my mother asked me to clear out the old filing cabinets in his home office. We needed to find his old financial records to apply for a state-sponsored medical assistance program to help cover his ongoing medication costs. I sat on the dusty floor of my father's study, surrounded by old tax returns, insurance policies, and paid bills. As I pulled out a thick, faded manila folder from the very back of the bottom drawer, something caught my eye. It was a secret secondary bank account book under my father's name one that my mother didn't know about. It was an account he used solely for his business transactions before he retired. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the booklet and began flipping through the pages of printed transactions, looking at the dates. My eyes scanned down the column until they hit the exact date of my father's stroke. My heart stopped. My breathing turned shallow. On the exact night my father collapsed, just 3 hours before he was rushed to the ER, there was a massive outgoing wire transfer from this secret account. The amount was $100,000, and the recipient's name was listed clearly in bold black ink, Julian Vance. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking violently. Julian hadn't lost his money in a market crash. But what was even more terrifying was the next page. I flipped to the transaction history of the following morning, the day after I had begged Julian on the phone for money to save our father's life. There was another transaction, an incoming wire transfer from an offshore shell company based in the Cayman Islands. The amount deposited into my father's secret account was exactly $1 million. And right below that deposit, an hour later, the entire balance of the account now, totaling over $1.1 million, was completely cleaned out, wired directly into a private, untraceable Swiss bank account. My mind was spinning. The startup company hadn't failed. Julian wasn't bankrupt. In fact, on the very night my father almost died, Julian had received a massive influx of mysterious wealth. My father's secret account had been used to launder over $1 million, and Julian was the one who pulled the strings. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into a terrifying shape. Julian hadn't run away because he was broke or ashamed. He had run away because he had stolen a fortune, and he was hiding a dark, dangerous secret. Just as I was staring at the bank statement, trying to process the sheer scale of the betrayal, I heard the sound of a heavy car engine idling outside the house. It didn't sound like the neighbors' cars. It sounded like an expensive, high-performance engine. I stood up, holding the bank statements tightly in my hand, and walked over to the window. A sleek, brand-new black Maybach pulled up into our modest driveway. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a tailored designer suit, dark sunglasses, and a diamond watch that caught the sunlight. It was Julian. The golden child had returned, and as he looked up at the house with a cold, triumphant smile on his face, I realized that my nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Why did Julian betray our family? And what is he doing with that luxury Maybach? The truth about my father's mysterious illness and the stolen millions is about to unravel in the next episode, and trust me, karma is coming for him. Don't miss out on the next part of this insane story. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment below sharing what you think Julian is up to. Thank you for watching Littell's All, and I will see you in episode 2.